Hi, everybody. My name is Nate Swick. I am the digital communications person here at the American Birding Association, and I am joined, as always, as often as we possibly can be, by my colleague at the ABA, Greg Neise. He does all our web doodads, and we are here to talk birds, birding, bird identification. What's this bird? How you doing, Greg?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing all right. I'm going to turn your mic down. It's a little hot. All
Yep.
right. This should be good now. Yeah, so as usual, what we do here in this little live question and answer forum is to talk about bird identification. What I have done is take a bunch of kind of interesting photos from the What's This Bird Facebook group where we are live now to tens of people to
Tens of
talk about
people out
birds.
there.
We're going to talk about birds and some of the interesting things that we've seen in that group recently. Hopefully, some things that you might be seeing where you are at this time of year here, sort of in the middle of October. Greg, how's migration doing where you are up in the Great Lakes, up in Chicago?
It is good. It is good. I mean, things the last couple of weeks have been really great. We've had a couple of cold fronts come through. Hawks are moving.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had just some really good birding. And one thing in particular, and it may just be because there's more birders, especially young birders, who tend to get out there and beat the bush a lot more. Um, but the number of Nelson sparrows this year has
Huh.
just been crazy.
Oh, that's wild.
I
Yeah,
mean,
that's
really,
cool.
just more than I can ever remember by maybe an order of magnitude.
Yeah, down here in the southeast, we are moving towards the end of warbler season, so we're starting to get things like palm warbler and blackpoll warbler, which I always associate as sort of the tail end of the warbler movement and beginning of the sparrows. So people are starting to report
Mm-hmm.
things like what do we get? Things like white-throated sparrow, white-crowned sparrow locally. We're sort of the beginning of those. I always think of like the first big cold front in the month of October always seems to bring those birds down, and you wake up the next morning and there are just sparrows all over the place. That's
Yeah.
October. October means sparrows where I am, and raptors, as
Well,
you say.
it's yep. I mean, it's all about sparrows and raptors. And yeah, I've been watching, with the fires and weird weather, especially out west and the droughts and everything. Been watching for vagrants that have been pushed around by that, and there doesn't seem to be any more than usual that I think.
Yeah.
Um, but there have been a couple of pretty strange vagrants that have nothing to do with our weather or fires or anything. That are
Yeah. How about
like the
the vagrancy situation in New Mexico? Is that what you're going to talk about?
that's exactly
Yeah.
where I was going. Yep.
New Mexico, of all places. New Mexico is one of those states that tends to do really well in the fall. The western half of the continent has a really more pronounced vagrancy at this time of year than maybe the eastern part. But New Mexico is if people think of New Mexico, they think of relatively dry, high altitude. But they have all these little patches of habitat that turn into like magnets for rare
Yep.
birds this time of year, and
Yep.
so they tend to get a lot of the eastern warblers showing up in
The
these
oasis
places.
effect.
The Oasis, yeah, but I don't think the Oasis has been what's going on lately. They've had this amazing
No.
run of unbelievable and unexpected rarities in the last couple weeks. It's been pretty wild to see. Starting
Again,
with
coming
the
from different, from
different
wildly different
directions. Yeah,
directions.
totally.
Okay, so they're eared quetzal,
Yeah, it's been a
possibly
it's been a
two,
year for eared quetzal in the
yeah,
southeast, and now New Mexico is getting in on the fun.
and a European golden plover. I mean, I never
It's
would have
mind blowing.
expected
It's
of
mind
all
blowing.
those places for that bird to show up. I never would have expected that.
Yeah, I made a comment in the Rare Bird Alert on the ABA page that it was the furthest west record. Uh, like the furthest west before this was Delaware, but I also forgot that Alaska has a couple. Alaska always screwing things up when I talk about
Alaska,
weird things like that.
Alaska is our furthest
They
east
barely
state.
count. They barely count. But anyway, we don't usually think of European golden plover as being a bird that you find in the mountain west. I mean, that is a bird. Almost all the ABA area records are from Newfoundland. A few scattered throughout
Yep,
eastern Canada and New England. It's not a bird you would expect to see in New Mexico, of all places.
exactly. Um, And let's see what else has been. Well, there was the news today. We can talk about that a little bit if you want, or we can just go by it of hooded crane,
Yeah, let's talk
unfortunately
about that.
shot in Alaska.
Yeah, before we
Uh,
talk about this, I do want to make a note to the people watching. If you have any questions about birds, bird ID, bird anything, please let us know. Throw it in the comments wherever you are watching. I'm keeping an eye on the
yep.
comments at on YouTube, on Twitter, Periscope, and on Facebook. We are in all the places. So if you have any questions or thoughts about birds, bird ID, what's going on in fall migration, wherever you are on the continent, please, let me know. Let us know, and we will be happy to comment on it or answer your questions. We will talk. We love talking about birds. We're going to talk about them for about 45 minutes to an hour now. So go ahead and give us
Yeah.
something to set us on the right track if you like. But yeah, go ahead. Hooded crane. Let's
Um,
talk about that.
yeah. So the little bit of backstory for people who are unfamiliar with the saga of the hooded crane
Saga.
in
Sure
North
matter.
America is that it's an endangered species. It's very rare. It has a very limited range in East Asia, and it's one of those birds like whooping cranes where most of the individuals are known. I mean, this bird is very well. It's a species that's very well kept track of. There's practically none in captivity, and the few that are in captivity are parts of breeding programs. They're always pinioned. They're always multiple banded, um, and they're carefully maintained. And in I believe it was 2010, 2011, a hooded crane or possibly two hooded cranes showed up, one in Nebraska and then one in Tennessee. And the Tennessee bird um, spent a good part of the late winter and spring in Indiana. And those records, I saw and photographed that bird. And the bird in Indiana, I think Nebraska and Indiana records committees both accepted that as a wild vagrant
They
and
did.
put it on their state checklists.
Yeah.
Um, and so about that time, and at that time, the ABA checklist committee opted to decline adding that species to the ABA checklist. They felt that there was not sufficient proof that this bird was wild, rather than escaped from captivity. Um, Ned Brinkley Ned Brinkley, the
A
former
lot of people
editor
did
of
not like that decision.
North American Birds, and I researched the daylights out of that and discovered that the chances of this bird being uh, escaped from captivity are almost zero. But there was a little bit of muddiness in that water, and that was that there was a private collector in Idaho who had hooded cranes that were part of a program he was volunteering to help with breeding them. And his personal situation fell apart, his collection fell apart, and those cranes just vanished. And nobody knows what happened to them, really. And but they were pinioned, so that means they can't fly. Their flight feathers are surgically removed and they don't grow back. Sometimes, if it's done sloppily, they do, but the bird can never really fly, and it's painfully obvious that this bird was pinioned. So the bird in Indiana and Nebraska, or birds, had perfect wings. I watched and photographed that bird flying, and it behaved like a wild bird. It didn't, one of the guys from ICF who I interviewed said, if this was
International
one of
Crane
our
Foundation.
birds, yes, International Crane Foundation, thank you for that, said, if this was one of our birds or one of the birds in captivity, it would have walked over to you and looked for food. These birds they are total pets, and they're in captivity to breed, and they work with people every day. So you put that all together, and the chances of this bird being escaped from somewhere are almost zero. But people on the records committee felt that there could be a black market, there could be something, and anyways,
It's a lot of speculation.
But now, one of the contingencies, or not one of the contingencies, but one of the things they pointed out was, if there were records or a record from Alaska, which is where these birds would have to come across with the Sandhill cranes, then that would be move the needle in the favor of wild vagrancy.
Sure would.
Well, Well, that just happened this week.
Yeah.
So now
So,
we can reopen the vault on this one.
yeah, yeah. Well, a lot of people expected that eventually we'd see a hooded crane back in the ABA area, especially if it were wild, as many people suspected. I'm
Yeah.
glad that record exists. It's unfortunate that the bird was shot, but they
Yeah.
are not the first ABA area vagrant to have suffered that fate, and it certainly almost certainly will not be the last. But
Yeah.
yeah, having that record, having that data point is critical, and yeah, it sounds great. I mean, and if the Alaska Bird Records Committee goes ahead and accepts this bird, I'm getting way ahead of myself. You're game planning here.
Yeah.
And the ABA checklist committee accepts this bird, then it doesn't matter what happened with the bird in Tennessee and Indiana and Nebraska. That bird can be counted on anyone's list because it's on the ABA checklist at that point.
That is true.
The fate of any individual bird
So-
does not matter. Yes, so that deep into the weeds of the accountability question. Thank you for bearing with us. Holly Miner says, I have an impid that I'd like to ID, but I can't figure out how to post the photo. Yeah, that is one of the weird things about the Facebook Live thing. You can't post the photo in the comments here,
Yeah.
but you can put the photo on the ABA What's This Bird group, and we or any of the other birders on that group will be happy to take a look at it. Holly, I hope that answers that question. If you have any other questions about bird ID, please let us know in the comments. We'll be happy to take them. Greg, to the photos?
Yes. Sure.
All right. This is a photo that was taken earlier this week and posted to the ABA What's This Bird Facebook group from Pine Hill, New Jersey. Greg, what are we looking at here?
Well, it's a warbler in a pine, so it must be a pine warbler.
It sounds right to me. It makes sense.
No, it's not. But if you thought that initially, we wouldn't think less of you because it does have a lot of yellow on it, and it is in a pine tree. But
Yeah.
a couple of things stand out here immediately, and one is the dark streaking on the chest.
Yeah, a lot of streaking.
That combination of dirty yellow and gray on the head, and especially the little yellow patch on the back of the neck. And this bird's thin, and you kind of have to use your imagination a little bit, but it would have a slightly decurved bill that once you get used to looking
saw it at
for
a better
it,
angle. Yeah.
it's utterly unique. All of which makes this a Cape May Warbler.
Cape May Warbler, which is appropriate that it was seen in Pine Hill, New Jersey, which is, I assume, close to Cape May, New Jersey. Everything in New Jersey is close to itself. It's sort of a small state. But yeah, Cape May Warbler, definitely. And I will say, this is where status and distribution does come into account as well, because I do think of Cape May as sort of a late migrating warbler, at least where I am on the East Coast. They peak in October, and sometimes you'll see them, at least in the Southeast, into November. I've seen them into early November. Yeah, so there'll be a lot of them moving through. And as Greg says, those streaks, the French name for this bird translates to tiger warbler, which I've always thought is a much better name than Cape May Warbler. And that tiny little bill, even if you can't see the decurve at the top, if you're looking at a profile, you will be able to see that better. But yeah, it's so small and pointy, which is something that stands out on a Cape May Warbler.
And also, it's one of the few warblers, along with pine, and strangely enough, black-throated blue and yellow-throated, that seem to frequent suet feeders.
Yeah, they do. They'll sometimes overwinter in the southern part of the U.S. At suet feeders. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and they're frequently in pine trees.
Yes, they are. They do like pine trees.
Yeah.
And it may be that little thin decurved bill is to pull tiny little insects out of the clusters of pine needles.
Amazing. All right. So I got another warbler for you, Greg. This one, 2 photos from Garden City, Kansas. So we're looking at the Midwest, the middle of the continent here. Not a great photo. little overexposed, underexposed. There's some lighting issues.
I hate photos like this with a passion. Because
hate them.
there are some very definite clues as to what this bird is.
Yeah, that's why I chose it.
But the the overall the color balance, the lighting, and everything is off, and
Yeah.
it just it's but on a picture like this, um, the one thing that you want to look at is structure, and the
Yeah.
thing that really sticks out on this bird is that rather short, very sharp spike like bill,
Mm-hmm.
and that is the hallmark of the Oreothlypis warblers. So those are the Nashville, orange crowned, Kalima, Virginias, that genus of
Mm-hmm.
warblers. They all have that same very sharp spike like bill.
Yep.
Um,
Used to
so
be
now,
vermivora if you're an
yep,
old birder. Actually, not
yeah.
that old. It
So
wasn't that long ago that they changed it.
no, it wasn't. I think maybe it was something else before that too. No,
Yeah.
um, but now we're down to status and distribution. So
Mm-hmm.
which one of those species is most likely in Garden City, Kansas?
It's orange crowned.
Yes.
Yeah. And orange crowned is another one of these late migrating warblers that a lot of people are going to start seeing in October into November, and like Cape May, even into the winter in a lot of parts of the southern part of the continent. Orange crowned is very wide ranging. You can find them from coast to coast, although the ones at the west are super green compared to the ones that we have east of the Rockies, which are a little bit more browner. But they're all sort of kind of plain. They say they're orange crown, but you don't almost never see the orange crown. I think I've only seen it in photos. I've never seen it in life.
Yeah.
But yeah, that
I think
tiny
I've
little bill.
Yeah, it's that, and well, and if you look at the pictures of warblers, or Sibley does an amazing job of painting them. Um, the bill structure in the different warbler genuses, there is differences, and once you learn them, a pine warbler has a different shaped bill from Cape May, as we said, and
Mm-hmm.
common yellowthroat has a different shaped bill from well, this bird. So the warblers aren't all just like a cookie cutter with different color patterns.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really good to look at the different genuses and genera, I should say,
Yes.
and sort of find the ways in which those birds within that little category are similar. We talked about this with the Oreothlypis genus, which is these orange-crowned Virginia Kalima. They're all kind of plain. They're all kind of round, very round, and they all have that little tiny little bill. And then you've got something like the Setophaga warblers, which is the really big genus of warblers, so maybe that's not super helpful, but they are all kind of long with a thicker bill, longer bill, and longer wings, kind of more lanky. I know you find your own ways to kind of describe these birds. I'm using mine, and they may or may not work for you, but
Well, and
they're
we've
good ways
in
to think about that.
and in talking about, I don't know why we both sort of hit a blind spot there, but in talking about Oreothlypis warblers, we neglected to mention the most frequently seen, which is Tennessee.
Tennessee warbler. Yeah, Tennessee and orange crown are sort of the classic difficult, species pair in that genus,
Yep.
at least for birds on the East Coast. But, status and distribution is a big way to think about it. Tennessee's, people are still seeing them, but they're starting to tail off now, and orange crown warblers are starting to ramp up.
Well, and before we get off of this bird and these pictures, again, take a really good hard look at that bill shape and learn it, because fall Nashville warbler is one of the most confusing birds
Yeah.
that we get, and people confuse it with mourning warbler,
Connecticut.
Connecticut warbler, and Virginias. There's a lot of really drab Nashvilles that people think are vagrant Virginias. And of course, those two are in the same genus. But when you're talking about birds that are outside of that genus, like mourning warbler, the bill shape is totally different. And, if you can tell that apart pretty darn quickly.
Yeah. Holly says that she has an impid. She would post it, but no one can agree what it is because her photo is so bad.
Yeah, you need.
Well,
really
I don't know what
good
to tell you
pictures
about that.
of
Yeah. Sometimes you can get a good look if you can see the wing, the primary projection. You can get some ideas. And
Yeah.
also, status and distribution, knowing who is supposed to be where is really helpful with Impedinex flycatchers.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Although
give it a shot. Who knows?
October and November, all bets are off. I
That's
mean,
true.
it's
That is
like,
absolutely true.
yeah.
Yeah, let's move on to our next bird. I threw this on here. Whoops. I threw this on here, and I meant to go to the field guide to have a look at it before so I could remind myself of which dowitcher I was looking at. But yeah, so
Yeah,
this
I'm
is a
gonna
photo.
just I hate still pictures of dowitchers, and I'm
Yeah.
just gonna let you take this one and agree with
Give me a
whatever you
second. I'm gonna
say
get my field guide.
because because when you learn to tell dowitchers apart in the field, a lot of it has to do with structure, and
Mm-hmm.
the two things that you learn to look for are the body shape and the bill shape. And here, the body shape is the bird is in a position that it's really, there's no it doesn't define itself one way or the other, and we can't see the whole bill.
Yeah.
So take it away, Nate.
So I'm gonna. So as typical with dowitchers, I'm going to give a suggestion and some things that I'm looking at. What as I try to identify this bird, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm identifying correctly, but these are the things that I'm looking at. So the flanks. We have a good look at the flanks. The flanks do not look like there is much going on there. Long-billed dowitcher is sort of the blurry flank side, and short-billed tends to have a bit more obvious barring on the side, although we can't really see that very well. Uh, for that, this sort of leans long-billed to me, just because there's not a lot going on there. Second thing we're going to look at is status and distribution. In the middle of the continent towards the west, long-billed is sort of the default dowitcher. A lot of the short-bills are closer to the coast. And with that, into October, into November, long-billed is a later migrant. So at least where I
Yeah.
live in the eastern part of the continent and southeast, when we see long-billed, we typically see them in like November, December,
Yeah.
late after the short bills have kind of vamoosed. So just with those two clues in mind, I would suggest that this is likely a long-billed dowitcher, though I would certainly like to see better photos to confirm that it is a long-billed dowitcher.
And yeah, with dowitchers, status and distribution tends to do a lot of the heavy lifting.
It does, and knowing when and where, as with most birding, I sometimes call those like soft field marks. So you think of the hard field marks as the ones that are actually on the bird that you're using, and then you've got soft field marks like behavior and time of year and habitat and things like that aren't necessarily what you're looking at on the bird, but are things that are crucial if we're trying to identify some of these tricky birds, or at least notice that something is different, right? You talked about Impedinex flycatchers in October and November, how all bets are off. Well,
Right.
you want to look a little bit closer at an Impedinex flycatcher that you see in October, November, December than you would at, say, one in September when the
Yeah.
regular ones are moving through.
Yeah, and with flycatchers in particular, after September, like you said, all bets are off because flycatchers love to fly around. They move
Hey, they
around.
call them flycatchers for a reason. They fly
Yeah,
and they catch things.
that made absolutely no sense.
It's terrible. It's terrible. Uh, Marcia Bellestri notes that the tail is more dark than light, and sort of a half moon under the eye favors long-billed. Again, we're looking at field marks that favor but maybe don't confirm long-billed. You get enough of those, maybe you can start thinking that you're pretty sure that you can put it on your eBird checklist as a long-billed dowitcher. Yeah, there's not one field mark that is like nailed. You've got this bird nailed, but if you get enough kind of subtle ones that sort of lead you in that direction, I could feel mostly confident enough for eBird perhaps.
And again, when you see them in the field, and especially when they're together, it's much easier than a static image. One static image.
Yeah, Jared Clark, a friend from Newfoundland, says he's wearing his Kauai Forest Recovery shirt. Yay.
All
With the
right,
rats.
kill all the mice.
Yep, kill them all, and let the rat god sort them out. All right, so we got another one from the west. I'm throwing Western birds at you today.
Right on.
Greg, this is a great time of year to
Shows
be birding in the western part of the continent.
it is.
Yeah, it's just yeah. Once we get into October, it's good stuff out there. I'm jealous of all the California birders right now, usually, but right now
Yeah,
especially.
they've been well. Just the West Coast has had a lot of really fun. They've had a lot of great vagrants from the east, but then they've also had some really fun stuff like a red-legged kittiwake.
Yeah.
And there was something else just recently, but whatever. Anyways,
Yeah. So this is from Kelowna, BC. I think I've got. Let me move it over here. I'm not exactly sure where that is in British Columbia. My British Columbia geography is not great. I suppose I can Google it, but it doesn't really matter. This is a bird that's found all across British Columbia, I imagine.
and
So
across a lot of the West.
a lot of the West, yeah. So what are you looking at when you see a bird like this, Greg?
Well, first thing is just the overall color. It's gray.
It's a very
it's not
unique
really.
kind of gray too.
It is. It's this dark ashy gray.
Yeah.
Um, and we also see that it's an icterid, which is a blackbird. And that's fairly obvious by the bill.
Yeah.
But the bill is rather thin compared to the other gray icterid that's common, which is a brown-headed cowbird.
I just want to say Kelowna is in south central BC. Thank you, Sunny and Stu. That was what I was going to guess, the Okanagan Valley, but I wasn't exactly sure. But yeah, thanks for confirming that. Thanks. Central South BC.
Yeah, that and the dark eye, which even though the iris on this bird is showing a little bit of color, it's still not a glaring white eye, which would distinguish it from the other similar species, which would be rusty blackbird, and this is a female brewer's blackbird.
Brewer's blackbird. Yeah, I really like this bird. I really like this plumage. We had some brewer's blackbirds that hung out for a few years in North Carolina on this like random cattle paddy, with like this muddy cattle place in the middle of yeah, and you get a small flock of them. And brewer's blackbird, such a cool. I like that color, that ashy gray color. These female brewer's blackbirds are really good looking birds. Wish I saw more of them here.
We've in north central Illinois. There's a guy that ranches bison. And that place is there. Well, there's brewer's blackbirds that are there during migration and in the winter. But then strangely enough, we have this tiny, and I mean like 6-8 pairs at the most, consistent breeding population in a state park on the shore of Lake Michigan, on the beach. Like it's one of the only in Illinois, it's one of the only untouched dune and swale habitats left on the lakefront. Yeah. And there is a tiny breeding population of brewer's blackbirds that's been there for my entire life. I mean, it's been there for 40 years or more. Yeah. 50 years. And it's kind of weird.
Yeah. But this, so birders in the West probably see a lot of these. They're pretty common, like gas station cattle, paddock birds. Yep. So yeah, you get them in big flocks frequently. So I'm not surprised you'd find them in Kelowna. But neat bird. Wish I saw more of them. Let's move on to the next one. I'll pause for a second, and I will say if any of y'all have questions, comments about birds, birding, any of that stuff, please let us know. Shoot us one in the comments. I'm trying to keep an eye on all the various places that people can comment. We are on YouTube, we're on Facebook in the What's This Bird group, and we are on Twitter. If you're watching on Twitter, say hello. So I got another warbler for you. It is, let me switch the scene here. This is another warbler. We can see most of it, but not all of it. It's in Cape May, New Jersey. Greg, is this another Cape May warbler?
No, it is not.
It's Cape May lowercase warbler.
Because, yeah, exactly. So, this bird, from what I can see in this photo and what I think it is, we can't see the slam dunk
That's why I
field mark.
chose this photo. That's why I chose this photo.
But we can see the yellow underparts, and the kind of pale ashy gray upper parts that include the head and the back and the wing panel, which has wing bars. So those features kind of narrow that down quite a bit. And it looks like we can see a little bit of gray going across the throat, which makes all of this, puts together a first year female magnolia warbler.
Indeed, a magnolia warbler in Cape May in a pine tree. Well, it's cedar tree.
A cedar tree.
But so it's not neither Cape May nor pine warbler. It is a magnolia warbler. Yeah.
Now
so go ahead.
The slam dunk field mark I was talking about is the tail pattern, and the magnolia warbler has a unique tail pattern, which is basically 50% black and 50% white from the underside. So yeah, broad black tip and a white base, and
like it's dipped in ink.
And as the bird moves around, it kind of spreads and flashes that tail, and it's very obvious when you get on one.
Yeah, they're very sort of lanky and long-tailed, very active when they move around. I always think of Cape May warbler, especially on the East Coast, as being primarily a fall migrant warbler. In the spring, when they're migrating north, they kind of stay towards the west, going kind of up the Mississippi River Valley, and then, of course, breeding across boreal Canada, and then coming back down a more easterly route as they come back down to the south. They winter in Central America and northern South America. So this is like a fall bird for me. I've seen a couple of them this fall already, but yeah, this sort of lanky, a little bit of streaks on the side, the wing bars, kind of blue-gray color, and of course, as Greg says, that real distinct pattern, real long tail with a big fat black tip at the end of it. If you're looking directly up, that is something that you're going to see really well.
Yep.
Alrighty. I got one more photo. We're already
what do we got?
At the
what
end.
Do we got?
We're at the end.
Oh no.
This one. This is a really nice photo that someone photoed. It's another Canadian bird. We have a lot of Canadian birds.
It is.
This time. Two. Maybe not a ton. But
this is another one that involves status and distribution.
Yep, exactly.
And
see,
that's why we work together.
Yep.
And before we get onto this bird, I want to mention something about status and distribution. The ABA publishes the journal of record of North American birding, called North American Birds. And we have moved the field reports, the regional field reports for North American birds to our website. And those are available to the general public rather than before only subscribers. You can get to that from our homepage. At the bottom, there is a picture of the North American Birds magazine. Click on that and you will see the field reports. And you can also get to it from our main menu. But those field reports are a really great way to learn status and distribution trends and stay on top of them. So we have regional editors from all over the ABA area who
all over North America. We have regional editors in the Caribbean and Central America as well.
Exactly. And the reports are fascinating, and there's also always pictures of really good birds. So
those are free to members now, right?
Those are free to the public. Those are open to the public.
I was going to use it as an excuse to push membership, but even if you're not, you should check it out.
Well, the magazine itself is part of membership online. You can subscribe to it as well, but subscribing to the magazine or joining the ABA is a way of supporting us publishing these regional reports and everything we do, including sitting here and yapping at you for an hour every other Friday.
That is right. And if you're interested in joining the ABA, if you enjoy these sorts of programs, you can join us at aba.org/join. We have memberships at a number of different levels. from student memberships, if you are obviously a student, to e-memberships, if you prefer to get all your magazines online, to full membership. They're all full memberships, but you can get all the magazines in the mail.
So my buddy in the comments, my buddy Steve Huggins, while we were talking about the hooded crane, as he is wont to do, just blurted out "ribeye of the sky," and I was going to, I know, and I was going
True,
to
though.
actually ban him from ever watching these again, and and just maybe harm him in real life, but he has redeemed himself just now by reminding me to encourage people to keep their hummingbird feeders up until they freeze during the day, because this is when the vagrants show up. This is when the fun stuff shows up.
Yep.
You know, if you look through the records of vagrant hummingbirds in the ABA area, you find things like, well, the last really good vagrant hummingbird I saw was an Anna's hummingbird in central Illinois in December, in 3 feet of snow. There's the mango, the green-breasted or black, whichever mango species it was, in southern Wisconsin that wintered in southern Wisconsin. And then, of course, Rufus and Calliope and others that move around. So, yes, keep those hummingbird feeders filled until they freeze during the day.
Absolutely. Here in North Carolina, we have one of the best hummingbird lists outside of Arizona. We have a ton of hummingbird species recorded here. We're still waiting for our first Rivoles. Oh, I hate saying it. Magnificent hummingbird. Rivoles hummingbird. It's the worst name. We're still waiting on it.
How do you go from magnificent to
Rivoles?
Yeah.
Rivoles. Anyway. I always think of the Believe It or Not Museum when I say it. Rivoles, Believe It or Not.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, let's look at this thrush. Look at this thrush. So this is one from Winnipeg, central Canada, Manitoba, and we talked a lot about a couple months ago. We were talking almost every time we did this about gray-cheeked versus Swainson's versus Veery, the Catharus thrushes, and a lot of those are gone by now. There's still a few gray-cheeked moving around. You might luck into a Veery or a Swainson's at this point. Most of those birds are moving south. We're well past the peak of thrush migration. But this one, is going to be coming down into much of the continent now.
Yep. This is the this is our facultative migrant Catharus thrush. So the others are obligate migrants, which they are on a schedule and they go to South America, and a Swainson's thrush that breeds in Quebec or wherever will fly to Costa Rica, and you need to have them be about 6 years old and climb on your shoulders.
Yeah, right.
But they will fly to places like Costa Rica and then maintain a winter territory there, and same place year after year, and then come back. They're on a schedule. These birds, this bird in particular, tends to kind of wander about a little bit, take its time. It moves as the weather changes.
Half hardy, as we call it.
Half hardy, and it'll only go as far south as it needs to. American robin is another example of that. And talking about cranes, Sandhill crane is another example of that. They'll stay up in Wisconsin until a hard freeze, and then they'll just go far enough south till they find water that's not frozen. So all that talk about status and distribution, but let's talk a little bit about how this bird looks.
Yeah, so it's a lot darker, a lot more bold spotting all over the chest than you'd expect to see on any of the other Catharus thrushes. Certainly Veery, generally a little bit more than Swainson's or gray-cheeked, and very kind of bright, rufusy red all over, and I think you can kind of see the brightness of the tail. That's a real good field mark for this one, but it's not you can't see it really well. But everything else points to a hermit thrush, good old hermit thrush for this bird.
And it also has when looking at thrushes, if you're not sure, and again, as we get later and later into October, the chances of it being anything other than a hermit thrush outside of
Yes.
Florida and the Gulf Coast are very small.
Yeah, we only had our first record of a overwintering Swainson's thrush in North Carolina like a couple of years ago.
But looking at this bird, it's obviously not a wood thrush. It's got an eye ring, and people they the Swainson's thrush, because Swainson's thrush has an eye ring. But when you learn to recognize Swainson's thrush, they have a unique kind of olive buffy face wash, and that the eye ring is more bold and it forms spectacles. But even in some birds where it doesn't, it still has this kind of weird ochre, almost worm-eating warbler color.
Real
buffy all over the face. Whereas you look at this bird, it's grayer, it's colder. It doesn't have any of those warm kind of buffy tones to it. So that rules out Swainson's. Gray cheek, doesn't have the eye ring. It's got a very cold gray face. And then Veery is just a much lighter marked bird. They're never this dark.
Yeah. It's just and this is a really nice photo, so it shows it really well. Just kind of generally real nice, but we don't always get such nice photos of thrushes, which doesn't help. Hermit thrush. A lot of those are going to be showing up this time of year. That's my last photo, Greg. We burned through it. We've been at this for about 45 minutes, which is about where we like to call it a day. If anyone has any questions about birdage or a bird ID or any of that stuff, please let us know in the comments. We'll be happy to take a last crack at it. This is your last chance for a couple weeks before we come back. Holly Miner says Holly Miner says her impid was ID'd as a least because of short primaries. That's a good time of year for least. She says the eBird reviewer said is wrong. I'm going to have a look at that. I'm going to try and find that bird, Holly, and see if I can give a thought. Go ahead, Greg.
Oh, I was just going to remind people that if they enjoy what we do here and enjoy the What's This Bird group and our other groups on Facebook and all of the content we have for the birding community on our website, join us and you'll get our magazine, our magazines, and you'll help support everything that we do for the birding community.
Yes, absolutely. I can't find that flycatcher offhand. I'll have a look at it later. But yeah, thanks.
aba.org/join.
That's right. I'm going to take one quick run around. No other questions. Otherwise, we're going to say good night or good day to you.
Wait a second. Daphne and Rose say they just posted an eagle on What's This Bird. All right, we'll have to take a look at that.
Yeah, we'll go have a look at it later.
We can't.
Facebook used to make it really easy for me to just like copy and paste the images into PowerPoint. It doesn't do that anymore. So
yeah, we can't flip through back and forth like we used to be able to.
Yeah. I might be able to. Yeah. I'll work something up, and maybe we can do that in the future. But in any case, otherwise, we're gonna say goodbye. We'll see you later. And join the ABA if you enjoy this sort of things. We'll see you guys. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching us, and good birding.
Bye-bye.